Hi, Stéphane. It's great to talk with you. I'm a big fan of Spring Boot. It really increases developer productivity. I like how easy it is to create a new project using a Spring Initializer and Spring Boot auto-configuration capabilities. One of the big topics in Spring Boot 2.0 is the support of Spring 5. How does this mean exactly? What's the new future-wise? Thank you.
So on Spring Framework 5 basically brings a new reactive story where you basically now have a choice when developing a web application, typically where you can either choose to develop your application using Spring MVC and a servlet-based model, or you can choose to use a reactive-based web app using, for instance, Project Reactor, which is an implementation of the Reactive Streams API, Reactive Streams specification. So it gives you really two ways, two options to develop your web applications. And this brought a lot of changes in the framework itself. So for instance, we also have a new web client API, which is a replacement for the REST template. Spring Framework 5 is also the first release where we can use Java 8. So this is a chance for us to finally be able to use the Java 8 APIs ourselves, because previously in Spring Framework 4 we could not to retain Java 6 compatibility. And Spring Framework 5 also we've started to embrace more the functional style, functional APIs. If you decide to develop your application with the reactive stack, you'll see that it's a natural move to use that paradigm, and we've made sure that it was consistent with the framework. So we now have a registration, bin registration API to use a functional style. We have an alternative to the annotation model for your controller called WebFlexFN, which allows you to develop your web applications using a programmatic router rather than annotated controllers. And finally, the last big one for Spring Framework 5 is the Kotlin support.
Which is great. That'd be great. Yes.
Because if you decide to go the functional route, then you may find that Java maybe is not the best candidate for that, and Kotlin has plenty of nice goodies and helps you to write really idiomatic code. So it was quite important for us that the framework had official support for it.
Great, Stéphane. Thank you. You invoked reactive programming. Reactive programming, how is reflected in Spring Boot 2?
So if you decide to use reactive programming, you need to be reactive end-to-end. So it's really about not blocking. It's really about describing what you need to do and let the framework basically call you whenever data of interest is available. And for that reason, you can't block anywhere if you want to develop such applications. So Spring Boot had to adapt to that. So that's the first big thing. So for instance, everything that we provide ourselves, we need to have a reactive counterpart. So the typical use case is the actuator, and the actuator provides management endpoints, so you can look at your you could look at the health of your application, you could get information about your application, you could get the bin in the context. There's plenty of things that you can query on the application, and that can't use blocking API anymore. So we
exactly. Very interesting. Yes.
So we
one other question I heard. Okay, Stéphane, yes?
Sure, yeah, go ahead. Go, yeah, I'm done.
Yes. One question I heard from many developers is Spring Boot is only suitable for writing microservice, or it can be used for other types of applications such as monolithic?
Oh yes, definitely. So we didn't really develop Spring Boot with a specific application type in mind. So you can use Spring Boot to develop any kind of applications, really. You may find a lot of references to microservices because it's a popular paradigm these days. But Spring Boot is in no way specific to an app. So if you want to write a command line application, for instance, you can definitely use Spring Boot for that, and you can use Spring Boot for Monolith.
Yes. What are best practices to migrate from a Spring Core framework to a Spring Boot based projects, according to you, Stéphane?
So there is a very well-defined process, even though I'm not sure it's written anywhere. So it's good that we have a chance to describe it. The very first thing to keep in mind, in my opinion, is that most of the work when you need to migrate a Spring Core-based application to Spring Boot is not related to Spring Boot itself, but it's related to the state of the project. So for instance, if it uses a very old third-party integration, so let's say it uses, I don't know, a very old Tomcat version or a very old Jackson version or a very old Hibernate version, the first thing to do really is to migrate your existing application without migrating to Spring Boot, so the exact same application, migrate it to the most recent third-party dependency so that you're aligned basically with what Spring Boot provides at the moment. And one way to do that is to use the Spring Boot BOM, which provides dependency management for your project. That way you can remove the versions that you've hard-coded in your project and rely on the one that Spring Boot provides. So only the BOM, so you don't use Spring Boot yet. It's just at the build level that you fixed dependencies to what we basically suggest. Once you've done that, you can introduce Spring Boot in your project without the use of auto-configuration. So auto-configuration is totally optional in Spring Boot. It only applies when enable auto-configuration is added on your project or if you add Spring Boot application on your project. So if you remove that annotation and you use Spring Boot, and rather than using that annotation, you import an existing XML config or Java config or whatever, you can start your application using Spring Boot. Well, there's plenty of features that you don't use, but it's still already one step further. And once you've done that, once you're in a situation where your existing application runs with the Spring Boot launcher and the Spring Boot dependency management, then you can enable the auto-configuration and start removing custom configuration and let Spring Boot does its job.
Exactly. Thank you for this detailed response about the migration. Another question, Stéphane. Are there some tips you would offer for us as Spring Boot developers and lovers? So
there is a few patterns that I see every now and then. One that I see quite often is actually someone willing to use a new feature for the project, and they think that they have to write some configuration to make that happen because they don't know what the auto configuration does, or they haven't read the documentation. That kind of thing happens, and so they think that, okay, I have to add a snippet of configuration to make it work. Actually, turns out that most of the time they don't. Either they need to tune a few properties, or maybe look how that thing is configured by Spring Boot. So the less configuration you add to your project, the less you'll have to maintain, or the less you'll have to make sure it still works when you upgrade from one version to the other. If you let Spring Boot do its thing, then if you upgrade, Spring Boot will make sure to give you the same feature, potentially with different versions of third-party dependencies, so that you don't have to mess with that. One thing that's directly related to that is there are a bunch of enable annotations. So enable WebMVC, enable WebFlux, enable scheduling. There's plenty of annotations outside of Spring Boot that you can use to trigger something, and sometimes it's just not necessary. One example is enable JMS. If you have a JMS client on the class bars, you have the JMS API. Spring Boot will auto-configure a connection factory, etc. You don't have to add enable JMS to make that happen. It will happen automatically. So if you add that annotation, it won't do anything, but it will be noise to your code. So don't do that. And finally, another piece of advice I can give is to make sure to use DevTools when you're working in your IDE. because it really helps. If you use it, it will, when your application runs, if you make a change to the application, it will update your application without having you to restart it. So that can save quite a lot of cycle when developing a feature.
Exactly, the application will restart automatically. Yes, is that?
Yeah, if you make a change, basically we look at the source file for the project, and when we detect that the class has been recompiled, or if you change a property file or something like that, we will restart the context, but in a very optimized way. So we keep all classes. The JVM, all the caches of the JVM are still up to date. So the restart is much faster than a cold start. So when the VM has basically to compute all that on startup.
Great news for us as developers. Final question, Stéphane. As we are all excited about Spring Boot, what's the plan in the next major release of Spring Boot?
So we are currently working on Spring Boot 2.2. So we had the team meeting early this month to discuss what we intend to work on. It's, as usual, directly related to what Spring Framework is doing. So Spring Framework 5.2 is also in the works with a release around June this year, June, July. That's the current plan. So Spring Boot will follow along with the Spring Boot 2.2 based on Spring Framework 5.2. There is quite a lot of performance-related initiative at the moment that we are working on. There is an improvement of our Kotlin support, because Kotlin as a language is evolving, and we have more and more users actually having an interest for the language and requesting features. So there are things that we are trying to improve to make the experience more idiomatic for them. We want to also switch to provide support for the JUnit 5 in a new JUnit version, so that if you use the Spring Boot test starter, you basically get the ability to run your test with JUnit 5 and keep the JUnit 4, so keep the vintage engine as a way to run your existing tests. And finally, on the Spring Boot side, because on the Spring Framework 5 there's more to it, like the RSocket support and related stories. But there is an initiative to work on giving more control to users, so trying to gather what the auto configuration does in a programmatic fashion, so that you can improve that in a different way. So there is an incubator at the moment called Spring Foo that's trying to investigate those options. So the ability to declare your configuration rather than letting the auto configuration do it for you. So it's pretty busy time for us.
Great. It seems to be exciting features. We are waiting for this Yes.
So you can look on the Spring.io blog, so the spring.io/blog, where we will try to describe those features as we finalize them. And there's of course the release announcement always published on the blog, and also on the Twitter account at Spring Boot.
Yes. Thank you, Stéphane, for your time. Thank you very much for these great informations, and I hope to see you again next interviews. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.